"You're not my daughter anymore," Norah said, voice calm, pen still wet from signing the disinheritance. Across from her, Lexi stood barefoot and pregnant, clutching the envelope like it was a death certificate. "I begged you," Lexi whispered. "And I bled for you," Norah replied. "Now I'm just done." Behind them, a fireplace crackled, devouring the last letter from Norah's own mother. In the next room, a sealed lockbox waited, marked, "For the child, if she ever wants the truth." "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." Setting: Norah's modest dining room, Asheville, North Carolina, late autumn. The frosting on the cake had started to sweat. Tiny beads of condensation clung to the white sugar roses, like the dessert itself had grown nervous. Norah sat at the head of the table, hands folded gently in her lap, while her daughter sliced the cake with surgical cheer. "Mom's always hated birthdays," Lexi said brightly, angling the knife just enough to press tension into the frosting. "Probably because they're just reminders of how close she's getting to, grandma status, alone and cranky." Joel let out a short, brittle laugh. The kids, Eli and Sophie, were too focused on the melting scoops of vanilla ice cream to notice the air tighten. Norah smiled thinly, lifting her paper napkin to dab the corner of her mouth. She didn't speak. Lexi pushed a plate toward her. "Here you go, birthday girl, 68 and still kickin'." "I'm not hungry," Norah said, her voice smooth as polished wood. "Oh, come on. You only turn ancient once," Lexi chirped, raising her wine glass. "To Mom. May she age better than Grandma did." Joel cleared his throat. "Lex." "What?" she shrugged. "I'm just saying, let's hope we're not visiting you in some cold-ass nursing home one day, right?" Norah didn't blink. She watched the candle flames flicker against the dining room walls. The room smelled of buttercream and vanilla and something sour beneath it, like something had spoiled under the floorboards. She pushed her chair back and stood. "Where you going?" Lexi asked, half laughing. "To get the good plates," Norah lied. She walked into the kitchen slowly, her knees aching in that way she never complained about. The cake sat untouched at the center of the table as her family went on without her, slicing, chewing, scrolling phones. She could hear them as clearly as if she were still in the room. God, she's so dramatic. She's just tired. No, she's being passive-aggressive as usual. Norah opened the cabinet, not for plates, but to breathe. Her hand rested on the wood panel for a long time before she let it fall. In her mind, she was back in the nursing home hallway, dim fluorescent lights flickering overhead, the smell of bleach and boiled carrots. Her mother had died 2 years ago in that place, bitter and silent, with no visitors at the end except the nurse who called at 3:12 a.m. They had never reconciled. Not really. Her mother had left her nothing. No letter, no explanation, just a brittle estate and years of emotional frostbite. Norah had sworn she'd never do that to her child, but as she stood in the kitchen now, Lexi's laughter echoing through the house, Norah bought, Norah furnished, Norah held together. She realized something chilling. She hadn't avoided becoming her mother. Lexi had made her into her. Norah walked back into the dining room and began clearing plates. Lexi raised an eyebrow. "We're not done." "You are," Norah said, stacking dessert forks with careful precision. Joel glanced up, alarmed but mute. The kids didn't notice. They rarely did anymore. Norah scraped half-eaten cake into the trash. The icing stuck to the sides of the garbage bag like a rotted promise. She rinsed each plate under hot water and didn't flinch when the steam hit her face. Later, after the house had emptied and the leftover wine had been corked, she stood in the hallway staring at the family photo wall. Years of holidays, school plays, vacations she paid for and was cropped out of. She reached out, lifted one of the frames. A younger Lexi grinning at Disneyland, Norah beside her, sunburned and tired, but smiling. She turned the photo over. The tape peeled with a sigh. In the morning, the frames would all be gone. Norah walked into her bedroom and sat down at the writing desk her mother once owned. She opened a leather-bound planner and uncapped a pen. She turned to a fresh page, then she wrote 4 words, slowly and clearly. "Change begins with silence." And finally, for the first time in a decade, she slept with the door closed. Setting: Asheville's East Side, a cracked sidewalk, a condemned childhood. The no trespassing sign was nailed crooked, like even the house didn't care anymore. Norah stood in the driveway of her childhood home, arms wrapped around herself despite the sun. The air smelled of dust and pine needles. The roof slouched like a drunk old man, and ivy clung to the brick like it was trying to pull the whole thing back into the ground. The demolition notice flapped in the wind. 2 weeks left. She stepped inside anyway. The front door groaned as it opened, and the scent hit her first. Mildew, old wood, and something unmistakably stale. Not rot, something colder. Forgotten breath, abandoned living. The wallpaper in the front hall still bore the faint outline of where her mother's cross used to hang. That same hall she'd walked down in socks too thin and courage too young, hoping for warmth and finding silence. She let her fingers trail along the paneling, paint peeling in ribbons. The living room was smaller than she remembered. Funny how grief shrinks the spaces that once felt enormous. The floral couch was gone. So was the coffee table her mother used to slam her keys on, like the weight of her disappointment had to be shared with the furniture. In the corner sat a small cedar chest, still locked. The last time she'd seen it, she was 17 and begging her mother to help with prom money. Her mother hadn't opened it then either. Just waved her off with a cigarette and a line Norah had never forgotten. "What you need and what I owe you aren't the same thing." She stood there now, staring at the same chest, but the anger had calcified, not sharp anymore, just heavy. Norah climbed the stairs slowly. One creaked like it always had, the third from the top. Her bedroom door was ajar, just as she'd left it the day she moved out with nothing but 2 suitcases and Lexi in her belly. Lexi. She entered the room and opened the closet. The carpet was threadbare, and moths had long since claimed the corners. On the top shelf, wrapped in an old flannel sheet, was the bundle she hadn't thought of in years. Her journals. There were 8 of them, cheap marble notebooks, spines cracked and pages yellowed. She'd started keeping them the month Lexi was born. Each one detailed a year. Notes, receipt, grocery tallies, hospital bills, handwritten documentation of every sacrifice, every penny scraped from bone to raise her daughter. She sat on the floor, knees aching, and opened the 4th journal. Lexi was 6 that year. The entries were shorter, less hopeful. One in particular stopped her breath. April 13th. Lexi threw her dinner, screamed for 45 minutes, said, "I never asked to be born." I cried in the bathroom with the water running, didn't want her to hear. Norah's hand trembled slightly as she closed the book. She leaned her head against the closet door and exhaled. She had vowed, promised, never to become her mother, to be soft where her mother was steel, open where her mother was closed. But standing in that room, surrounded by the ghosts of silence, she finally admitted the truth. Lexi hadn't just brought her mother's shadow back to life, she'd invited it in, dressed it in sharper clothes, and taught it to speak with a smile. Norah rose slowly, journals pressed to her chest like relics. She turned and made her way down the stairs, each step groaning under memory. At the door, she paused, looked back one last time. "No ghosts left worth feeding," she whispered. She stepped outside, sunlight slicing through the clouds like it had been waiting for her. In the car, she placed the journals in the passenger seat, buckled them in like passengers. Tomorrow, she'd meet Eleanor. They had work to do, but tonight she would reread every word, because this time her memory wouldn't be weaponized. It would be proof. Setting: Norah's living room, evening light breaking across a shifting threshold. The house was quiet when Norah returned. Too quiet for the hour, like even the walls were waiting. She slid the journals onto her coffee table, then sank into the armchair beside the fireplace that hadn't been lit since Lexi's last Mother's Day brunch. A glass of iced tea sat untouched on the coaster, condensation bleeding into the wood grain. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she opened her laptop. Lexi's Instagram loaded first. Norah still followed her out of habit, not affection. And there Lexi was, grinning in a new cream pea coat outside a boutique hotel in Highlands. Joel had his arm slung around her waist, holding up 2 fingers like a peace sign but cockier. Cabin retreat for the soul, Shak's grateful life, Shas mom paid. Norah stared at the caption. The words didn't hurt. They itched, like an old scar reacting to the weather. She clicked to the next slide, a photo of their new kitchen, double ovens, granite counters, a custom wine fridge already half full. The next was a boomerang, champagne flutes clinking against sunset. The fourth, a snapshot of Lexi's phone screen showing a Venmo transfer. Norah's name. The amount, $6,000. Norah's chest tightened. She hadn't approved anything that large. She opened her banking app. 1 withdrawal, 2, 3. The most recent was made 2 days ago, labeled Family Support, routed from the joint emergency account she hadn't touched in months. 5 years ago, she'd co-signed a loan for Lexi and Joel. Back then, Lexi had taken her hands in hers, eyes glossy, and said, I just want you to know you'll never be alone like Grandma. This is our promise. Norah had believed her, had convinced herself that Lexi's ambition was only sharp because life had dulled her too early, that she just needed time. A nest. Now that nest was a 3-bedroom vacation property with cathedral ceilings and heated tile floors. And Norah? She was still in the same house, same drafty windows, counting every decimal like a prayer. She closed the app. The tea had gone warm. Norah picked up the phone and called Dean, her financial advisor since Harold left. His voice hadn't changed, still clipped, efficient, but with an edge of practiced concern. Tell me, he said, before she even explained why she was calling. She did. Slowly, fact by fact, no panic, just arithmetic and betrayal. When she finished, there was a pause. Do you want to recover the funds or protect what's left? Norah looked at the fireplace, at the framed photo of Lexi and Joel on the mantel, a gift from 3 Christmases ago. She got up, removed it, and placed it in the drawer beneath the television. Protect, she said. Everything. Then we start with the will, Dean replied. Update the beneficiaries. Pull the life insurance clause, revoke all joint authorizations, create a holding account she can't touch. We can move quietly but quickly. Norah nodded. I also want the house reassessed, transferred. You're thinking long-term? I'm thinking last straw. Dean didn't ask more. He just said, I'll send paperwork by morning. After she hung up, Norah walked to the window. Outside, the wind carried leaves in frantic spirals, like even nature was trying to sweep itself clean. In the kitchen, she poured the tea down the sink. The clink of ice against steel was louder than she expected. Then she opened her planner, same one she'd written in the night of her birthday. She flipped past the fresh page labeled, Change Begins with Silence, and wrote on the next line, Passive isn't peaceful. It's just the bruise before the break. Tomorrow, she would see Eleanor. Tonight, she would rest, with both eyes open. A quiet notary's office off Merriman Avenue, Asheville, 2 pens, 1 promise. The room smelled faintly of toner and eucalyptus. Norah sat with her back straight in the faux leather chair, the will spread open in front of her like a confession. The blinds filtered the late afternoon light into ribbons across her lap. Eleanor sat beside her, fingers laced, face set like stone, softened only by loyalty. You sure? The paralegal asked, her voice respectful but tired from a day of similar questions. Norah didn't hesitate. I've never been more sure. The notary turned the folder, pointed to the line marked Beneficiaries Amended. See Addendum C. Norah signed in blue ink. Neat, tight, without tremble. Lexi's name was gone. In its place, Balsam Refuge Women's Shelter Trust. A pause hung between them after the final signature. Norah looked at Eleanor. I want you listed as executor, she said. Eleanor blinked but didn't object. All right. They both knew what that meant. It wasn't about paperwork. It was about war. Clean war. Strategic war. One fought in signatures and silence. Norah slid the pen back across the desk. And I want the funds moved. Eleanor nodded. Already queued. I called the LLC attorney this morning. We'll shift the retirement savings into the private holding account, coded under Whitestone, just like we discussed. Lexi won't see it? Not unless she's a forensic accountant, and she's too busy curating brunch. Nora's lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile. Outside, wind rustled the dying branches of a nearby maple tree. The season was turning. So was something inside her. As they walked to the car, Norah paused at a streetlight. Her reflection stared back from a bakery window. Older, sharper, not sad, just stripped down to truth. "You think she'll notice?" Norah asked. Eleanor shrugged. "Only when the spending slows, only when the guilt can't be pawned off anymore." That night, Norah opened her keepsake chest, the one Lexi had always rolled her eyes at. "Why do you hold on to this junk?" Lexi had once asked, wrist deep in old scarves. "You act like the past owes you something." "No," Norah had replied, "but it remembers." Now she sorted carefully. Photos, documents, jewelry. The ring Harold gave her after Lexi's birth. A tiny sapphire, the stone of wisdom and sorrow. She placed it in a cloth pouch and tucked it inside a fireproof folder marked Final Instructions. She found an old cassette tape, Lexi's high school recital. She set it aside. Some ghosts could be allowed to hum in the corner. Then came the bank file. She pulled up the joint account screen. Lexi's name gleamed beside hers like graffiti on stone. Norah selected Remove Authorized Party. The system pinged. "Are you sure you want to proceed? This action is permanent." She clicked yes. A soft memory flickered. Lexi, maybe 20, arms crossed, standing in Norah's kitchen during a tax argument. "You act like you're owed something just because you raised me. Newsflash, Mom, that's the bare minimum." Norah remembered the sting, how it had pressed under her skin like a splinter that refused to fester or heal. Now she let the wound close for good. By midnight, she'd packed 4 boxes, photo albums, a handful of first editions, her mother's brooch she never wore but never threw out. She didn't cry. Instead, she took out her planner and wrote one more line under the last, "A wound is not an inheritance." Her phone buzzed. "Lexi. Hey, can you spot me $1,000 just for the weekend? We'll talk Monday. Love you." Norah stared at the screen. She didn't reply. Instead, she deleted the message, closed her phone, and turned off the light. Because this time, Norah wasn't waiting to be asked. She was already gone. Lexi and Joel's open-concept kitchen, Sunday mid-morning, countertops clean, motives anything but Lexi opened the door wearing a linen robe and a mimosa smile. "You're early." Norah stepped inside without greeting. She scanned the kitchen. Slate counters, brushed gold hardware, an indoor herb garden that looked too curated to ever be used. Joel stood by the espresso machine, half-turned like he wanted to vanish into the backsplash. Norah reached into her purse, pulled out a printed copy of her latest bank statement, and slid it across the island. Lexi didn't look at it. She sipped her drink. "Not a fan of email?" she said lightly. "You pulled $6,000, Norah said, "from the joint emergency fund, without asking." Lexi finally glanced at the paper. "You told me years ago I could use it if I needed. That was for medical expenses, for care, not for artisan cabinetry." Lexi's lips thinned. "Wow. Okay, so this is what we're doing? You want me to itemize every little thing I've done for you since Dad left?" Norah didn't blink. "You mean since you were 11? Joel cleared his throat. "Maybe we should all just—" Lexi cut him off. "No, it's fine. She wants to fight? Let's fight. You've always played the martyr card, Mom. Always. I sacrificed this. I gave up that. It's exhausting. I was your mother." "You were a mother," Lexi snapped. "That doesn't mean I owe you a pension. You're lucky I kept you in the loop at all. Most daughters would have put you in assisted living by now." Joel looked down at the espresso button like it could transport him elsewhere. Norah folded the paper back in half. Her voice stayed level. "I see." Lexi rolled her eyes. "You're too old to understand how finances work now. I'm managing things the best way I can. For us. You want a detailed report? I'll print one." "No need," Norah said, stepping toward the door. "You've been very clear." That night, she logged into her banking app and locked the card linked to the account. Then she changed her online access credentials, new passwords, 2-factor authentication. She paused at the security question. "Who was your childhood hero?" She typed, "Me." Eleanor called the next morning. "Everything's been liquidated," she said. "The LCC is clean, accounts diversified and password protected. I used your maiden name in the Montana P.O. box," Norah exhaled. "What about the deed?" "Still under your LLC. She's just a tenant in Pearls." "Perfect." Norah spent the afternoon in her study, drafting the final letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even cold, just precise. She addressed it, "To whom it may concern upon my passing." It detailed everything: assets, exclusions, medical directives, and one bold paragraph titled "Irrevocable Disinheritance." Lexi's name didn't appear again. Instead, there was a clause for Lexi's future children, should they ever seek answers. A note that read simply, "I once gave everything to my daughter. She gave none of it back." This letter is not punishment. It's boundary set in ink. Norah sealed the envelope and placed it in the fireproof folder with her planner. Later that week, Lexi posted another carousel on Instagram. "Brunch vibes, #boss mom, built not bought." Norah watched it with the volume off. Lexi laughed in the video, hair curled, blouse tucked just so. Friends clinked glasses behind her. Joel took the video, his reflection caught briefly in the stainless steel of the range. Norah leaned back in her chair. They were standing in the dining room of a house she still legally owned. She smiled. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't victorious. It was the kind of smile that knows a storm has already passed and left her standing. Her phone buzzed. Eleanor again. "Small update," she said. Lexi tried to pull a small charge on the locked account. Declined. What did she try to buy? "A silk robe, $238. Norah chuckled. "Velvet gloves." "But you've got the iron fist," Eleanor replied. And as Norah hung up, she walked to her desk and flipped her planner to the next blank page. She wrote, "Love doesn't excuse theft, and motherhood doesn't excuse betrayal." Then she underlined one final line. "They never saw me coming." Late fall in Asheville. A chill creeping through relationships faster than through walls, Lexi sat cross-legged on the kitchen island, phone wedged between her shoulder and ear, as her real estate attorney's voice crackled through Bluetooth. "What do you mean it's not in my name?" she barked. "We've lived here for 2 years." Joel hovered by the window, eyes darting between her and the mailbox, like a verdict might appear in the form of a white envelope. "Is my name on it?" The silence that followed from the speaker was an answer all its own. Lexi slid off the counter, bare feet slapping tile. "You said the equity transfer went through," she hissed at Joel. "You said your mom was signing everything over. I didn't press. She always acted like it was temporary." Lexi paced. Her robe hung open now, mascara smudged from the morning's ugly tears. The call disconnected. She dialed again, and again. Then she screamed. Joel flinched but didn't speak. He rarely did now, afraid of saying something that would echo later in a deposition. Norah sat in her own kitchen, sunlight warming the wood table she'd refinished herself. Her phone buzzed across the room. She didn't move. It had been doing that for hours. Voicemails, texts, unknown numbers, all blocked. That morning, she'd gone to the carrier store and changed everything. New number, new SIM, new silence. Eleanor had smiled when she told her. "Peace is expensive," she'd said. "Good thing you can afford it now." By Tuesday, Lexi was on TikTok. Her face filled the frame, puffy, red-rimmed, damp from what looked like fresh tears. "I never thought I'd be here," she began, voice trembling, "but my own mother is trying to make me and my children homeless." Joel passed in the background carrying a yoga mat. "She's weaponizing money against me after everything I've done, after all the love I've shown her. She's elderly, confused, and honestly, this feels like abuse." The video racked up 14,000 views in 3 hours. The comments came in waves. "Sounds like elder abuse in reverse." "Respect your mom's boundaries." "You mean, she paid for your whole life and this is the thanks?" "Wait, she owns the house you're filming in?" Team Norah. Lexi posted 2 more videos. One featured a montage of birthday brunches. The second tried to explain the joint account misunderstandings. Each new upload performed worse. She pivoted. A day later, a local parenting influencer reshared Norah's letter from the podcast archives. The caption read, "Sometimes a mother's silence is the loudest act of love." Norah didn't respond publicly. She didn't have to. Instead, she drafted a certified letter. It was simple, clinical, titled, Notice of Reputational Misconduct and Misrepresentation, addressed directly to the HR director of Lexi's marketing firm. It included screenshots, public TikToks, withdrawal records, timeline overlays. The final line read, While I decline to engage in personal discourse, I must protect my name and professional references from mischaracterization. Please consider this a formal notification of breach in reputational ethics. She mailed it with a delivery receipt. Lexi showed up at Norah's house 3 days later. Knocked, rang, banged. Norah stood behind the curtains but never opened them. Through the slats, she watched Lexi step back, look up at the porch eaves, eyes scanning as if they might find a witness in the rafters. Then she shouted loud enough for the neighbor's dog to bark, "You'll die alone like Grandma. That's what you're buying with all this." Norah didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped away from the window, made herself tea, and pulled out her notebook. On the next page, beneath her last entry, she wrote, "Love with leverage isn't love, and silence sometimes is the sharpest response." Just as she capped her pen, a new email dinged on her laptop. Subject line, Legal Inquiry, Property Residency Status, Lexi A. From a paralegal at the firm Norah used to work with. She leaned back and smiled. The house keys may have still been on Lexi's ring, but the title? That belonged to Norah, and so did the end of this story. Norah's home office, Asheville, a quiet screen, a loud, reckoning Lexi's third TikTok hit 1 million views by Thursday morning. This time she was crying harder. No makeup, hoodie pulled over her head, kids' toys staged in the background like unspoken punctuation. The caption read, "When your own mom would rather see you suffer than help." Soundtrack, melancholic piano loop. Hashtag, Sha's toxic parents, Sha elder revenge, Sha cancelled by mom. Norah watched it on mute. The performance was almost impressive. Lexi's eyes perfectly glassy, voice breaking at the word abandoned. At one point she held up an eviction notice that wasn't even signed. But TikTok didn't check for signatures, it checked for drama. And drama, Lexi delivered in high definition. But this time, the algorithm bit back. By noon, At Forensic Finance posted a stitched response. "Well, this is a rabbit hole," the woman said, glasses pushed high on her nose. "Let's talk public records." Cut to a screen recording, Lexi's LLC filings, mortgage statements, and a rather damning snapshot of a trust fund registered under N. Whitestone Holdings. The voiceover continued, "This woman's mother co-signed a home loan, daughter defaulted, properties legally owned by the mother's shell corporation, and oh, those brunches, tracked on an American Express ending in 1187. Guess who pays that bill?" The internet exploded. "This is like Succession, Asheville edition. Team Norah all the way. Imagine having a whole breakdown in someone else's house. Elder revenge is my new religion. Financial abuse of a parent, and she's crying on TikTok?" Within 48 hours, the narrative flipped. Lexi lost a brand partnership. A wellness influencer she often collabed with posted a statement, "We stand against the exploitation of elder care and family manipulation." Joel deleted his socials. Norah, however, didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Eleanor texted late Friday, "Check your inbox. A podcaster wants you." The subject line read, Invitation, Toxic Bonds and Financial Healing, Episode 38, The Mother Clause. Norah hesitated, but something in her, something that had been cataloging pain in careful cursive for years, said yes. She agreed anonymously. The host introduced her as M. They spoke for 40 minutes. Norah's voice stayed even, never bitter. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. She talked about sacrifice and silence and what happens when motherhood becomes a transaction. She said one line that stuck, "I raised a daughter. She raised a weapon. I just chose not to keep handing her ammunition." By Monday, the episode had 300,000 listens. By Wednesday, it trended. Eleanor called again. "You got fan mail," she said. "You want the highlights?" "Please." Michigan woman cut her son off after he tried to move his girlfriend into her house rent-free. Bold. A retired nurse in Kansas says your voice gave her the courage to rewrite her will. Norah smiled. Anyone threaten legal action? Just one, a 22-year-old named Madison who says you're promoting elder propaganda. Norah laughed, a real one this time, low and unguarded. She looked out the window. A red cardinal hopped across the back fence. The wind had a bite now. She opened her notebook, flipped past old entries. On a fresh page, she wrote, "Truth doesn't need to shout when the lies come with receipts." Just then, a new email pinged from Tara Evans, Family Affairs Weekly Subject, Profile Request, The Anonymous Mother. Everyone's rooting for Norah stared at it, then clicked Mark as unread. Her phone vibrated. It was Lexi, blocked. She picked up her tea instead, because at this point, Norah had gone viral for being quiet, and that was a kind of fame you couldn't monetize. Not with tears, not with tantrums, not with hashtags. She stood and walked to her filing cabinet, unlocked a drawer labeled Future, real inside, a sealed envelope, to be opened by legal counsel if she died unexpectedly. She held it for a beat, then set it back in its place, because Norah wasn't going anywhere. Not until the story finished the way she'd always planned, with receipts and relief and nothing left Lexi could steal. Norah's sunlit study, late afternoon, still air, breaking point beneath it. The call came from a number Norah didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something told her to answer. "This is Norah Whitestone," she said calmly. "Mrs. Whitestone, this is Darren Owens, property manager for Willow Ridge Apartments. I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation." His tone said what his words wouldn't. He explained, Lexi had applied to lease a luxury unit in the newly developed complex on Hawthorne Avenue. 2 bedrooms, pool access, wine fridge. She claimed her mother would co-sign. She submitted Norah's name, address, and signature. Only, it wasn't Norah's signature. It was a bad imitation. Slanted, shaky, inked with the kind of arrogance that came from assuming no one would check. Norah's voice didn't rise. "Send me everything," she said. He did. By evening, she was on the phone with Eleanor and a fraud attorney in Charlotte. "File it officially," Norah said. "No settlements, no second chances." Joel called the next morning. She didn't pick up. Then he emailed, "I know she messed up, but I'm begging you not to press charges. She's unraveling." Norah stared at the blinking cursor before typing. She started this thread. "I'm just tying it off," then hit delete. No response. She opened her notebook instead and turned back 5 years, an entry titled Graduation Day. Lexi in a red cap and gown, grinning like she already owned the world. Norah had written one line that day. She told me, "I'll never be like you." I smiled like it was a compliment. Now she reread that sentence as if through a microscope. It wasn't a statement, it was a prophecy. She closed the book. Later that week, she met with the director of a local college scholarship fund. The woman's name was Gina. Kind eyes, hands calloused from years of administrative red tape. Norah handed her a check, the first installment redirected from Lexi's former trust. The memo line read, "For daughters who break cycles." Gina asked if she'd like the fund to carry a name. Norah paused, then said, "Yes. Call it the Whitestone Renewal Award." It was the first time the name felt like something worth passing down. That night, Norah opened a blank Word document on her laptop. Not a journal this time, not a letter, but something colder, cleaner. She titled it, Obituary, Pending Publication. The opening line was simple. Norah Whitestone, mother of none by choice, died peacefully, having lived truthfully. The rest unfolded like a ledger of quiet resilience. No grandchild mentions, no surviving daughter, just her own name, her own legacy, and a single quote beneath, "Let them say I ended what hurt me." She saved the document and printed one copy, folded it into her estate folder, beneath the sealed letter, beneath the new will. Lexi's phone buzzed at 4:52 p.m. 2 days later. A manila envelope arrived at her door by courier. Inside, a cease and desist order. Official, ironclad, legally binding. It included demands to remove her false online statements, a warning of reputational damages, and a clause outlining the fraud complaint's criminal implications. Joel read the letter twice, pale, quiet. Lexi laughed, sharp and thin. "She's bluffing." But Joel didn't look convinced. "I don't think she is," he said. "Not anymore." Lexi threw the envelope across the room. Norah, meanwhile, stood at her garden window, trimming dead leaves from the rosemary bush that had outlasted 3 winters. She looked up when she heard the ping of an email. From Eleanor. Subject line, "Filed, confirmed." She opened it, saw the official case number, the documentation, then closed her laptop and walked into the guest room she'd converted into a library. She pulled one book off the shelf, a memoir of a woman who left her family for her sanity. On the first page, a handwritten dedication, to anyone told they're ungrateful just for surviving. Norah pressed the book to her chest. Just then, her doorbell rang. She didn't move. Let them ring. Let them wonder. Because the next chapter wasn't waiting on her doorstep. It was already in her hands. Cafe Mulberry, downtown Asheville. Rain-spattered windows, lukewarm redemption. The bell above the cafe door gave a weak chime as Joel stepped in, shoulders hunched like he expected a punch. Norah was already seated near the window, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, eyes on the street. She didn't look up when he sat. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. She stirred her tea once, then set the spoon down. "Say what you came to say." Joel took off his cap, twisted it between his hands. "She's pregnant." Norah's gaze finally lifted. It didn't soften. Was that meant to be a reset button? He swallowed. I'm not saying it fixes anything, but she's different, unstable. The hormones, the pressure. She's not herself. Norah raised an eyebrow. Then who is she? Because that girl at my kitchen table stealing $6,000 and smiling about it, that wasn't new. He didn't argue. "She's scared," he said instead, "and maybe she's lashing out, but this child changes things." "For whom?" Norah asked, voice even. "Her? You? For you. You don't have to forgive her, but the baby—" She leaned back. Rain tapped against the window like the sky itself was trying to interrupt. "The baby changes nothing," she said. "You want me to bankroll remorse? I won't." Joel looked down. "It's not like that. Joel," she said quietly, "Lexi has weaponized every relationship she's ever had. You were just more convenient than most." He opened his mouth, then closed it. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the cracked cuticle on his thumb he kept picking at. "She's been keeping things from me," he admitted. "Money stuff. The vacation house? I thought it was a timeshare, not full ownership. I only found out because the property tax bill came in both our names." Norah nodded slowly. "And now you're here." He didn't deny it. "She told me once," Joel continued, "that if I ever turned on her, she'd make sure I regretted it publicly. She has screenshots, emails. She said she'd destroy me with context." He gave a small laugh. "Whatever that means." Norah finished her tea and stood. She pulled a folded sheet of paper from her coat and laid it on the table. "What's this?" "My updated will," she said. "A copy for you." Joel opened it and scanned. Beneath a highlighted clause, "All future descendants of Lexi Whitestone are ineligible for financial inheritance, allocation, or trust." "She said once you'd come around when the baby showed up," he said quietly. "She was wrong." Joel tapped the page with a shaking finger. "Why me?" "You're the only one left with eyes open," she said. "If you ever need to clear your name, I'll have my attorney take your statement. I'll notarize it." Joel blinked. "You'd do that?" "I'd rather the truth be preserved, even from inside the wreckage." He stared at her for a long moment. "You don't hate the baby," he said. "No," Norah said. "I hate that it will be used like a rope, something she can throw around others' necks and call love." He nodded once, slowly, like a man finally seeing the horizon through fog. As she turned to leave, he called after her. "What happens next?" Norah paused at the door. "Your child can have a future," she said. "Just not with my past." The wind caught her coat as she stepped out into the rain. Back home, Norah opened her planner and added a new tab. Contingency 2, post-Lexi lineage. She drafted a letter for her lawyer, noting the legal provisions to seal future trust accounts until the child reached 21, only if certain ethical conditions were met. As she sealed the envelope, her phone buzzed again. A notification, Lexi's newest post. Caption, "You're not punishing me, Mom. You're punishing your own grandchild." Norah turned off her phone and filed the letter under a new drawer label, Legacy Earned, because motherhood had been a battlefield. But lineage? That was war by other means. Early winter, Asheville, brittle branches, colder truths. The voicemail wasn't long. 42 seconds of Lexi's voice, acid-laced, breathless with fury. Norah had saved it weeks ago. Not because she needed the reminder, but because the truth ages better when it's recorded. "You think you're some noble matriarch?" Lexi had snapped. "You're just bitter and jealous that I still have a life, that I matter. You want to punish me? Fine. But don't pretend it's about morals. You're petty. Just like Grandma." Norah had listened to it once, then filed it under a folder titled, When History Repeats. Now, sitting at her desk with the envelope from the lawyer still cooling in her inbox, she forwarded the voicemail to a journalist she'd met briefly at the nonprofit gala the year before. Just a subject line, "A daughter's version. Now here's mine." The journalist's response came within the hour. Confirmed. Authenticity verified. Running with it tonight. Name withheld, as requested. Norah shut her laptop, then opened the window, letting in the bitter air. The article dropped that night. Headline, When Love Becomes Leverage, a Mother's Final Line. It included a transcription of the voicemail and anonymous verification of financial abuse. TikTok reposted it within hours. Threads exploded. Reddit caught fire. By morning, Lexi was trending for all the wrong reasons. Wait, she's the toxic one? Turns out Mom wasn't the villain, just the vault. Can we normalize mothers not being ATMs? This voicemail makes me sick. How do you talk to a parent like that? Influencers who'd once reposted Lexi's brunch content quietly deleted every tag. A parenting blog issued a formal apology for prematurely promoting an unverified narrative. Lexi's digital sponsorships vanished like smoke in the wind, and Norah, she remained silent. Except for one thing, she filed the restraining order that afternoon. The clerk at the courthouse didn't even blink. The paperwork was routine, cold, clinical. But Norah's hands didn't shake as she signed the final line. Emergency contact, Eleanor Blake. Reason for order, psychological harassment, financial coercion, reputational defamation. It was the first time she'd written it out, clean and in print. My daughter is no longer safe for me to love. That night, after locking the door and setting the alarm, Norah pulled a box from the closet. Inside, an old towel, yellowed letters from her ex-husband, a faded photograph of her mother seated in a recliner, smoking, scowling, wrapped in a throw blanket she never let anyone else use. Norah sat on the floor and remembered, washing dishes in silence while her mother criticized from the couch. "I could have had a better life without you. You were an accident. Don't act like I owe you warmth." Norah had never recorded those words, but she remembered every syllable. She tucked the photo back inside and whispered, "I broke that chain." Then she stood, logged into her private blog, the one she kept for moments like this. She titled the post, "To all the women with daughters who became strangers, she wrote without restraint, about the guilt, the betrayal, the quiet years of bargaining in the name of love, and finally, the peace that came not with forgiveness, but with boundaries carved deep. Some people only call you cruel when they run out of ways to use you." She posted it. No tags, no hashtags, just truth. It was shared 2,000 times within the first hour. By morning, it had hit 10,000. Her inbox overflowed. "You just described my daughter. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. I printed this. It's going in my will." 3 days later, a formal letter arrived in the mail. Heavy linen paper, gold-embossed logo, the Rowan Center for Family Boundary Recovery. A handwritten note attached. "Ms. Whitestone, your words reached us. Would you consider speaking at our spring conference? We think many would benefit from your story." Norah stared at the invitation. Outside, the wind curled under the window pane. Not cruel, just honest. She reached for a pen, wrote one sentence in her planner. I've lived quiet too long. Let them hear me now. Just as she closed the notebook, her doorbell rang again. She didn't answer. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine, because silence had delivered her this far. But now she was ready to speak. Asheville. Crisp February light, the air between winter and something almost soft. The librarian was gentle. She accepted the cardboard box with the kind of reverence people usually reserved for ashes or heirlooms. Inside, photo albums, 6 of them, decades of holidays, school plays, and forced smiles frozen under plastic sleeves. I'd like these archived, Norah said, adjusting the scarf around her neck. They document the life of a family that once existed. The librarian blinked but didn't question it. Would you like to be contacted if we digitize them? Norah shook her head. Number I've seen enough. She walked out lighter than she expected. The cold kissed her cheeks like a farewell. That afternoon, she opened the cedar chest in her bedroom. Folded at the bottom were Lexi's baby clothes, tiny sweaters, one with a duck stitched into the chest. The matching hat had always slipped over Lexi's eyes no matter how many times Norah adjusted it. She held the bundle for a moment, felt the ghost of tiny fingers curling around hers, then dropped it into a trash bag, not out of spite, out of necessity. Some memories couldn't be preserved. They needed to be released. She took the bag to the curb before she could change her mind. Later that night, she wrote a letter. It was addressed not to Lexi, but to the child growing quietly inside her. A child who might never know her except through whispers, warnings, and the flicker of a story gone viral. You are not your mother's mistakes, it began. You are not my regrets. I chose silence for years to preserve peace. I choose truth now to preserve dignity. If you find this, know that I didn't abandon love. I abandoned pain. And sometimes that's the only kind of love left to give. She sealed the letter, labeled it with the year and the words, to be opened only if they ask. It went into a lockbox beneath her bed, tucked beside insurance papers and deeds. The next morning, she went to her primary care office. Emergency contact update? The nurse asked. Norah didn't hesitate. Eleanor Blake, friend, durable power of attorney. The nurse nodded and typed without comment. It felt final, but not heavy, like a train switching tracks after too many years on the wrong rail. At home, she slid a VHS into the dusty player Joel had installed a decade ago. The screen blinked blue, then flashed to a living room long gone. Norah, younger, thinner, hair darker, held a camcorder and narrated a birthday party. Lexi was turning 7. The cake was crooked. The singing was off-key. But there she was, Lexi in a glitter crown, arms crossed, rolling her eyes as Norah tried to straighten it. Norah hit pause. She stared at the screen for a long time, then rewound, paused again on a frame where Lexi looked almost joyful, then let it play, just once, before turning it off and ejecting the tape. Enough. The auditorium was small but packed. Women filled every seat. Teachers, nurses, single moms, retirees with folded hands and unread apologies buried in their purses. Norah stood at the podium, fingers resting lightly on the edge like she might fall without that anchor. But when she opened her mouth, the words came like they'd always lived under her tongue. She spoke of motherhood, of silence mistaken for agreement, of guilt weaponized by proximity. I used to think love meant endurance, she said. Now I know. It means knowing when to stop the bleeding. At the end, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was reverent, like 100 women clapping for themselves. She walked off stage into the arms of Eleanor, who whispered, "You did it." "No," Norah said softly. "I ended it." Outside, dusk had turned Asheville gold. The streets shimmered in thawing puddles, winter beginning its slow retreat. Norah walked slowly down the steps of the building, past women dabbing tears, past counselors offering pamphlets. She didn't stop. She didn't need another support group. She was her own evidence now. At the corner, a woman she didn't recognize called out, "Ms. Whitestone?" Norah turned, just slightly. The woman smiled. "Thank you." Norah nodded once, then kept walking. The air smelled like new wood and distant rain, and for the first time in years, her smile came easy. Because peace, unlike pain, didn't beg to be seen. It simply stayed. And this time, it had found her. Norah's front porch, mid-March dusk, a sky unsure whether to storm or settle. The knock came just before sunset. Norah opened the door and saw her daughter, not as she was in memory or in court filings or blurry TikToks, but just as she stood now. 7 months pregnant, wind-blown, and visibly trembling. "I just need 5 minutes," Lexi said. Norah stepped aside without a word. They sat on the porch swing. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was earned, worn down like riverstone. Lexi looked down at her hands. "I'm scared." Norah waited. "She kicks all the time now," Lexi whispered. "Sometimes it feels like she's fighting me from the inside, like she knows she's coming into something broken." Norah's eyes didn't soften. "Then don't break her." Lexi flinched but kept going. "I don't have anyone else. Joel's gone. My job's on pause. Everyone who used to call me back has stopped." "Sounds familiar," Norah said. "I didn't come for money," Lexi added quickly. "I swear." Norah tilted her head. "Then why are you here?" Lexi's voice cracked. "Because she deserves a grandmother. Because I don't know how to raise a girl without turning her into me." Norah looked straight at her. "I needed a daughter, and you killed her." The words landed like stone on glass, cracking whatever narrative Lexi had built before coming. She blinked. Her mouth opened, closed. Then, "That's cruel." "No," Norah said calmly. "Cruel was watching you lie, steal, manipulate, and then cry when the bill came due. I was overwhelmed, hormonal. I said things I didn't mean." Norah shook her head slowly. "You said things you rehearsed." Lexi pressed her palms to her belly. "So that's it? You're just erasing me?" Norah stood, walked inside for a moment, then returned with a white envelope. She handed it over. Lexi opened it. Inside, her formal legal disownment papers. Already notarized, already filed. A quiet gasp escaped her lips. "You really did it." Norah nodded. "I did what you asked for, years ago." Lexi looked up, confusion flickering in her eyes. "You told me I wasn't your family," Norah said. "I just finally listened." Lexi's lip trembled. "So what am I supposed to tell her when she asks about you?" "Tell her the truth," Norah said. "Tell her her mother was warned, and that her grandmother drew a line, not out of hate, but survival." Lexi stood suddenly, unsteady on her feet. She held the envelope like it burned. "You don't get to disappear and still act righteous." Norah walked to the door. "You're not the only one who learned to survive." Lexi paused on the top step, the last of the light catching in her eyes. "I hope she never turns out like me," she said softly. "I hope she never has to," Norah replied. Lexi looked away, nodded once, then walked down the path in silence. Norah closed the door behind her, not hard, not soft, just firm. She leaned against the wood for a moment, eyes closed. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt free. And freedom, unlike forgiveness, didn't demand a reunion, just a boundary. She turned and lit the hallway lamp. The house glowed gold in the rising dark. On the entry table sat a blank note card. She picked it up and wrote just 2 words, "Never again." Then she slid it into the drawer labeled "Endings That Earned Themselves." Outside, the wind shifted, but inside, Norah stood still, finally and fully, without waiting for another knock. Early spring Asheville, paint-splattered daylight, a home finally hers. The first thing to go was the wallpaper in the guest room. Lexi had once insisted on the floral pattern, claiming it gave the house a coastal grandma vibe. Norah peeled it off strip by strip until the bare wall stood pale and honest. By the end of the week, she'd painted it a soft sunrise yellow, not cheerful, hopeful. The kitchen came next. Cupboards repainted, handles changed, the granite countertops resurfaced in butcher block. The table she used to sit at, calculating interest rates and guilt, was replaced by a round one that seated exactly 2, just enough for her and possibility. On a warm Saturday morning, Norah visited the animal shelter. She wasn't looking, not really, but a wiry mutt with copper eyes and a torn ear sat perfectly still as others barked and paced. "He doesn't beg," the attendant said, "just watches." Norah knelt beside him. Same. She named him Franklin, after the street she'd grown up on, the part of her history that still felt worth salvaging. At home, he followed her from room to room but never intruded. When she cried, rarely now and never without reason, he curled beside her without asking why. Each Tuesday, Norah volunteered at the Balsam Refuge Women's Center, mostly front desk work, filing, phone calls. But sometimes she stayed after hours to listen, really listen, to women with brittle voices and burdened eyes. "You're good at this," Gina, the director, said after her second month. "I've had practice," Norah replied. She didn't elaborate. In April, she sat at her desk and opened a fresh document. Title, Daughter of None. The words didn't pour. They arrived like visitors. Measured. Intentional. Each chapter dissected a version of herself she'd once been. The pleaser. The apologist. The silent. The survivor. She didn't try to write for forgiveness. She wrote to make sure someone else wouldn't feel alone when they chose freedom over performance. 3 months later, the first batch of reader mail arrived. She hadn't expected much. A few polite notes, maybe, but there were hundreds. Typed, handwritten, printed on floral stationery, or scribbled on index cards. "My mother finally understands. You just saved my retirement. And my soul." I bought 3 copies. One for me, one for my sister, one for my mother, who hasn't spoken to me since I left. Norah kept every single one. Some she framed, some she burned, ceremonially, letting their pain lift as smoke from the fireplace she'd finally repaired. Unexpected friendships formed like spring bulbs, quiet at first, then vibrant. Eleanor introduced her to a woman named Patrice, who'd once left a husband, 3 grown sons, and a lake house behind because none of them could hear me over their inheritance. They met for coffee once a week now, laughed more often than not. On her 69th birthday, Norah woke early, let Franklin out to chase squirrels, and made herself lemon pancakes. She didn't answer the phone, didn't check Lexi's socials, didn't cry. She read a chapter from her own book out loud, just for herself, then went to the garden and clipped roses for no one but her. She spent the afternoon writing a speech for the fall conference. The closing line read, "You do not have to stay broken just because someone once handed you love with a price tag." That evening, she opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving, not for company, but for courage. She toasted the quiet, and the quiet toasted back. As she sat on the porch swing with Franklin asleep at her feet, the sky turned a kind of purple Norah didn't remember ever noticing before, like dusk had stopped pretending to be night. She leaned back, hands folded across her lap. This was not the life she once imagined. It was better, because it was honest. Inside, the answering machine blinked. She didn't move. She had everything worth hearing already here, with her, around her, and most of all, within her. And tomorrow? Tomorrow she'd repaint the last walls still carrying fingerprints that weren't hers. Norah's living room, late spring, windows open, signatures final. The pen sat perfectly centered on the table. Blue ink. Fine point. Nothing fancy, just permanent. Norah exhaled, then signed her name. The document was thick, 18 pages of legal revisions, notarized exclusions, and irrevocable clauses. Her signature landed beneath the final line. Final estate transfer, charitable redirection clause. Everything once tethered to Lexi, her old college savings, the remaining inheritance trust, the dormant stock Norah had hoped would someday buy a home for her grandchild, was now redirected. Balsam Refuge Women's Center, the Whitestone Renewal Scholarship, a fund for single working mothers recovering from financial abuse. Across the table, Eleanor blinked hard but didn't look away. "You sure?" Norah nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything I didn't want to be true." She slid the signed pages back into the envelope. "It's done," she said. Eleanor reached over and gently touched her wrist. "You didn't just walk away, Norah. You rewrote the terms." Later that night, the house was quiet. Franklin snoozed by the bookshelf, one paw twitching in a dream. Norah stood in front of a photo frame on the mantel. It was empty now. Lexi's graduation picture had been removed weeks ago. At first, she thought she'd replace it with something else. Maybe a landscape, maybe nothing at all. But now she realized the empty frame said more. It held space for absence. Not as a wound, but as a witness. She made tea, carried it to her desk, and opened her journal. Not the one for memories, but the one she used for reckoning. Inside the front cover was a line she'd written decades ago at 19. I won't become her. Her mother had worn cruelty like a perfume, applied in layers, always lingering. You think the world owes you softness just because you were born crying, she'd once told Norah. For years, Norah had feared she'd one day echo those words without meaning to. But now, as she glanced around her house, the yellow walls, the patched floor, the silence no longer bruised, she knew the truth. She hadn't become her mother. She'd become something harder to name, something stronger, someone who survived without replicating the wreckage. In the drawer beneath the desk sat the letter, the one she'd written to the baby. She hadn't touched it since sealing it. Now she picked it up, ran her fingers along the edge. For a moment she imagined a child, 12, maybe 13, finding it, reading her name for the first time in something other than bitterness or gossip. Norah didn't expect redemption, but she'd written that letter for the slim possibility that someday truth might outrun narrative. She placed it in a new envelope, this one addressed to her estate attorney. Attached was a note, to be delivered to Lexi's child only upon personal request at legal age. Never before, never unsolicited. She wrote the date, initialed it, then sealed it tight. The post office was empty that morning, save for a teenager behind the counter wearing earbuds and a faded band shirt. Certified mail? He asked without looking up. Yes, Norah said. As he weighed the envelope, she glanced at the display wall of stamps. Butterflies, civil rights leaders, a series on American quilts. Those, she said, pointing to the ones that read Voices of the Past. The envelope slid across the counter. He stamped it. Receipt in the bag. Thank you, Norah said, and meant it. Outside, the breeze caught her coat as she stepped back into the light. She paused on the sidewalk. There were things that might never come back. Apologies, understanding, blood that felt like more than duty. But what she had now was peace that held, even in the shape of silence. She walked past a mother arguing with her teenage daughter outside the grocery store. The girl stormed ahead. The mother followed, lips tight with effort. Norah didn't stare. She simply placed a hand over her chest and breathed. Back home, the empty frame waited. And this time, it didn't ache. It honored. Early morning, Norah's house. One final reckoning before the day begins. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, the handwriting sharp and scolding, even in ink. Norah found it tucked between old tax records and a lease agreement from 1982. She hadn't meant to find it, wasn't even looking for it, but there it was. A letter from her mother. Unopened. She sat at the kitchen table. Franklin curled at her feet, the sky just beginning to shift from navy to pearl. The envelope crackled as she peeled it open. The letter began the way they always had. No greeting, just judgment. You always were dramatic. Your problem is you think boundaries make you brave. I gave you everything. You gave me disappointment. Norah read every word. She didn't cry. It was cruel, condescending, narcissism in cursive, but more than anything, it was familiar. And that familiarity was the final thread she needed to cut. She walked to the fireplace, turned the switch, and let the gas bloom to life. The paper curled quickly, blackening at the edges, then vanishing into itself. The flames swallowed her mother's last version of history without ceremony. Ash, not legacy. When it was done, she stood there for a moment longer, hands warm from the heat, heart colder, but freer. Back at her desk, she opened her manuscript file. Daughter of None. She scrolled to the final chapter, still unfinished. Now, she wrote, closure is not kindness. It is courage with a deadline. Some of us weren't raised with love. We were raised with consequences dressed as parenting. And still, we lived. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but truthfully in the end. And for some of us, the end is finally ours to write. She clicked save. Then she opened a new document and titled it, Addendum, for future generations. One sentence. You inherit nothing from me but the right to start fresh. She printed both pages and filed them with the estate folder. Outside, the horizon blushed pink behind the hills. She took her coffee and stepped onto the porch, Franklin following close behind. He settled beside her as she sat in the old rocking chair Joel once tried to replace with something trendier. She'd kept this one because it squeaked. It reminded her of movement, of age, of stubborn things that still had use. The coffee was warm. The air smelled of damp soil and cherry blossom. Norah watched the sun stretch across the street like a promise with no fine print. Then, her phone buzzed. She picked it up without dread. A message from Gina at the Women's Center. New intake today. Older woman. Wants to disinherit her daughter. Asked if we had anyone to walk her through it. I told her I knew just the woman. Norah smiled. A real one. Nothing withheld. She typed back, I'll help her write the paperwork. Franklin lifted his head, sensing motion. She scratched behind his ear and stood. There were no more letters to burn, no more entries to rewrite, no more ghosts waiting in file folders. Only women learning to choose themselves, sometimes for the first time. And Norah? She'd become their notary of freedom. Outside, the morning bloomed, and for once, no part of her waited for the past to knock.